From our early roots in Universalist and Unitarian Christianity, through the blossoming of humanism and ongoing dialogue with scientific developments, to the reemergence of sense of spirituality in creative interplay with humanism, process theology, liberation theologies, and religious naturalism, to a religious pluralism that embraces traditions and practices emerging from the organic multi-religiosity of Unitarian Universalists today, Unitarian Universalism has evolved in the context of a changing American and global society and in response to new insights from an ever-widening circle of voices and perspectives. Just from Reverend Dr. Sherry Prudhomme's initial statement alone in her theological reflection on the value of transformation, do we truly get a sense of the magnitude of how much our faith tradition has changed in the span of 2,000 years of history? As much as we still hang on to some of the vestiges of our early Christian heritage, the reality is that, as a result of all the circumstances that we have encountered, we are and have become a profoundly different faith tradition. This is not a judgment or criticism by any means. It is simply what is, a fact that has come about as a result of the transformation that is the theme of today's service and our reflection today. The word transformation has a somewhat unexpected definition. At least it did for me as I began to write this sermon. From two Latin words that mean across type, the word transformation is defined as a complete change in the appearance or character of something or someone, especially so that that thing or person is improved. I was struck by the inherent hope that was present at the end of that definition, especially when you consider that most humans are apprehensive of transformation because it plays into fears about the unknown and what the future will hold. Yet, it is worth the effort to remind ourselves that even though transformation does bring about a complete change, that change is not necessarily a bad thing and can have a positive outcome and result in a positive trajectory. Much has been the case with Unitarian Universalism in general. Looking at the pantheon of prophetic people throughout history that we lift up as sources of our living tradition, there is perhaps no greater exemplar of the response to transformation as a positive attribute than that of Unitarian clergyman Arthur Powell Davies. A Welshman born near Liverpool, Davies began his career as a promising Methodist pastor and came to the United States in 1929 in order to serve several smaller Methodist congregations in Maine. After developing a relationship with one of the local Unitarian ministers, Vincent Silliman, and through his own study and discernment, Davies became a Unitarian in 1933 and moved to Summit, New Jersey, to become the minister of the Summit Community Church. He remained their minister until 1944, and during that time helped them develop a Unitarian statement of faith, which is profoundly different than a creed, but that is a sermon for another day, and convinced them to join the American Unitarian Association in 1942. The church today, known as Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Summit, has close to 500 members and is one of the largest and well-known UU congregations in the country. In 1944, Davies was called to the position that he would be most closely associated with, as minister of All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. For a man who was enthralled by the history and development of America and who referred to Unitarianism as, quote, founded on freedom and therefore a truly American faith, it was a match made in heaven. He came to the nation's capital at a pivotal time in US history. The country was just emerging from the specter of World War II and entering into a Cold War with the Soviet Union. Anti-communist sentiment had extended to every facet of American culture, and after 1948, the House Un-American Activities Committee began to broaden its focus from communist influence in Hollywood to include more public figures such as prominent scientists, government employees, and clergy members. At a pivotal moment when the country was primed and ready to move into the next chapter of its history, Davies took full advantage of his prophetic voice and quickly became a well-known liberal religious voice in the DC metro area. In many ways, Davies was the perfect poster child to advertise Unitarianism to a nation returning from war that was hungry for new ideas and new perspectives. Theologically speaking, Davies could not have been more of a classic Unitarian. He counted William Ellery Channing and Thomas Jefferson as some of his religious influences, specifically the former, which illustrated to him that Unitarianism was existing in harmony with nature, that it was not limited to the written word, and that it was a rational religion. He was also clearly heavily influenced by early 20th century Universalist preacher Clarence Skinner in his view that God was inseparable from political and economic life. He once wrote, "Those who have faith in the world are the ones upon whom rests the tremendous responsibility of redeeming the world." From a practical theological standpoint, which was most evident throughout his ministry in DC, he was a firm believer in the pragmatic theory of thought and action espoused by James Leader Adams, and once also famously wrote, "I am not interested in what you think of the sermon, of the preacher, of the church, or anything else. I am interested in only what you are going to do." Davies clearly lived out this mantra through his actions both within and outside the church walls, and urged the members of his congregation to do the same. In one of his more famous sermons in 1948, which back then regularly clocked in at a whopping 35 minutes, please know that the minister currently standing before you has no intentions of returning back to those bygone days, thank you very much. Titled "The Shelter of Good Intentions," Davies declared from the pulpit that he would be boycotting all racially segregated restaurants from that point forward, and not only asked his congregation to do the same, then distributed 40,000 copies of a list of all of the racially segregated restaurants in the city for them to go out and invite others in the community to join boycotts. In January of 1946, Davies formed the Washington chapter of the Unitarian Fellowship for Social Justice to enable congregants concerned with social problems to meet for information, discussion, and action. During his time at All Souls, he pressured the Metropolitan Boys Club number 10, which provided recreational services to around 400 boys in the neighborhood, but did not accept people of color, to accept all boys until 1954, when the club withdrew itself from meeting at the church. Undaunted, Davies worked with the Board of Trustees and Unitarian Service Committee to establish the Columbia Heights Boys Club, which was integrated from its inception. In addition to being a radical voice for racial equality at a time before the civil rights movement gained national momentum, he also led several successful overseas relief campaigns and frequently challenged politicians, both from his pulpit and in his writings, to live up to the ideals of the Constitution that they claimed to profess. He served as the president of Food for Freedom and was on the board of directors of the Unitarian Service Committee, Meadville Theological School at the University of Chicago, and Federal Union Incorporated. He was an active council member of the Planned Parenthood Federation, the National Committee for Mental Hygiene, Americans for Democratic Action, the Population Reference Bureau, and Protestants and Other Americans for the Separation of Church and State. He led All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. for 13 years until his untimely death at the age of 55 on September 26, 1957, from a blood clot in his lungs while working at his desk in the parsonage. Not only had All Souls experienced unprecedented growth during his leadership, but he had also helped to start no less than 7 new Unitarian congregations in the Washington area, most of which listened to Davies' sermons by a direct wire every Sunday morning and exist to this day. As we reflect on the life of A. Powell Davies, we must ask ourselves, how are we, as Unitarian Universalists, called to respond to the challenges of our day? The election in November presents us with a moment of profound responsibility. At stake are issues that speak directly to our deepest values: the protection of human rights, the defense of democracy, the safeguarding of our planet, and the pursuit of justice for all people. These are not abstract political concerns. They are moral imperatives that speak to the heart of our faith. In the spirit of A. Powell Davies, we must recognize that democracy is not a passive endeavor. It requires our active participation, our vigilance, and our commitment to the common good. Voting is not merely a civic duty, it is an act of moral witness, a way of affirming that every person's voice and dignity matter. As people of faith, we are called not only to cast our ballots, but to engage our communities, to have difficult conversations, and to stand up for those who are marginalized. We are living in a time when silence is not an option. The stakes are too high, the consequences too great. The choices we make in this election will shape the future of our country and the world for generations to come. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to bring our values to the ballot box, the values of equity, compassion, and justice. So what does this mean for us here today? First, it means that we must commit ourselves to being informed and engaged citizens. We must take time to educate ourselves and others about what is at stake. Second, it means we must reach out to our neighbors, friends, and family to ensure that they, too, are participating in the democratic process. Voter suppression remains a real threat, and we must do all we can to protect the right to vote for all people, particularly those in marginalized communities. Finally, we must be willing to speak out publicly, boldly, and without hesitation when we see injustice. Whether it is in conversations with loved ones, in our workplaces, or in the public square, we must use our voices to advocate for policies that align with our deepest values. In the words of A. Powell Davies, when justice comes, it will be because courageous people have sought it, not because it fell like a meteor upon the earth. Let us be those courageous people. Let us leave this place today committed to living our values in all that we do, remembering that the work of justice is not a sprint, but a marathon. The election in November is one step on that long journey, and each of us has a role to play. May we go forth with courage, conviction, and a deep sense of hope, knowing that together we can help bend the arc of the universe toward justice. May it ever continue to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.